When you have a hole in your neck, don't face the shower head. Be very careful shaving. Clean out your speech valve twice a day.
You can quit. Call 1-800-QUIT now for help getting free medication.
Our precious children. We live for them, work for them, and struggle to keep them safe. Guarding them from the unseen dangers of our world. And yet so many overlook the one simple step that can save their lives. Protect your children. Keep them buckled up.
Hi, I'm Art Hobson. I'm the author of Tales of the Quantum, and you're watching Fayetteville Public Television.
Ever since the late 1890s, when the first films came out, millions of people have discussed and argued films passionately over the years. And sooner or later, in every discussion, someone is heard to say in a bored voice, "People, it's only a movie." And so people may be a little bit feeling silly about the discussion they've been having. So our guest today is going to tell us about this feeling. This is Chris Ott. Chris, is it ever only just a movie?
It can be. It can be, but usually not. Filmmakers are increasingly more conscious of what they're doing psychologically to you, and how your perceptual dynamics work. And they have to sort of know how people tick in order to make movies that make money and are blockbusters.
A lot of people really are not even aware of what's going on sort of psychologically behind the scenes either, are they?
No, but the filmmakers have to be. In fact, I guess it would be, somebody might argue a good filmmaker would be one that hid the fact that he was being manipulative, maybe. But contemporary filmmakers are all very versed in the psychology of cinema watching. There's called the cinema literacy. That's one aspect, but there's also subconscious layers of cinematic responses that filmmakers know about and audiences don't. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about, is what is called the element of myth that occurs that underlies big blockbuster stories. And I was going to talk about the genesis of that and when that was discovered. And you want me to go ahead?
So, we're not just going to talk about Jason and the Argonauts.
No, I can hardly remember that movie, but I do remember wasn't that with the skeletons?
Yeah.
And they were jingling,
and
they
had
had
the Harryhausen effects.
Yeah. No, those movies didn't need have a whole lot. Oh yeah, okay.
Right,
those are movies about myths. No, we're going to talk about movies that are not about myths.
Okay.
But have an underlying mythical structure that's invisible to the audience. But I want to talk about how this happened. Most people, it depends on who you're talking to. Some people don't know what we're talking about when we're talking about myth. They think that we mean that if I say the myth behind the story of Moses, some people think that I'm saying it's just a myth.
And they get their backs up when you say that.
Yeah, that really upsets people, and they don't understand that it's an academic exercise in understanding the dynamics of stories and how they're told, and wondering about why there are certain structures in stories. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you something that was discovered first by an academic that had no interest in film at all, Joseph Campbell, who was purely an intellectual, and how it got picked up by the filmmakers in the 1960s and entered into cinema, and they realized that it had always been subconsciously there. Now that's maybe over the top, what I just said. Let me try and start from the beginning.
He wrote a famous book, didn't he?
Right.
That I just was looking over this afternoon, and now I can't remember the title.
The Hero with a Thousand Faces.
That's right, yeah.
Okay, Joseph Campbell was a guy who had been studying mathematics, and then he started to get interested in Native American Indians and started getting interested in their culture. And so he switched his degree toward the humanities in the 1940s. And he got his master's in something, like Sanskrit and all these foreign languages and foreign cultures in Europe. And then in 1945, he did a really odd thing. I guess you could say sort of a beatnik. He took a cabin in Woodstock, New York, on a farm. There was a guy who would rent out to artists a little shack on his farm with no running water, no electricity, and you could do your art, whatever it was, and the rent was just insanely low. So he had a little money that he'd gotten in advance for a book. So he sat there in Woodstock starting in 1945, right after World War II, and he started studying all the myths of the world, like before writing this book. It was going to be some kind of self-help book originally, and he just read for 5 years in this
cabin.
In this cabin. I mean, he would take walks and go, but there was, you go outside because there's no lights on outside. So he wrote for 5 years, and then the result was a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces, which has become a classic. And in the book, Joseph Campbell had isolated a story that he found running through every single culture of the world. And he actually mapped out this story, what he called the hero myth. And it has parts like, this must happen, this must happen. And it doesn't matter if you're in a Hindu culture, or you're in Christian or Judaic or Islamic or what it is, or you go back to the ancient Greeks, or you could go to Polynesian islands, or you could, you can study Egyptian mythology, which is none of those that I just mentioned, and you find the same story, the same plot points are hit every time.
Is it the same sort of hero or just the same sort of story?
It's the same. Both. It's both. But the name of the book is called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. So that you get the idea. So here I'm going to tell the story, the structure that he found in what he called the hero myth, and I'm going to point it out in. I'm going to take a couple movies, okay, and I'm also going to at the same time take the story of Exodus, which is the story of Moses freeing the slaves, the Jews, the Hebrews, from Egypt in the Old Testament. And we're going to see that the same marks are hit. And then I'm going to say how this totally, when this got discovered by Hollywood, they got a big, big charge because they suddenly went, oh my God, we've hit the Holy Grail. All right. And when we follow this map, we make blockbusters. We don't follow this map, we make duds. It's really weird. Now, if you go to film school, you read Joseph Campbell's secondary literature about Joseph Campbell in regard to cinema is studied. You have to understand the mythological structure of the way the mind is set up to tell and understand a story, at least a hero, an adventure. Okay, so here's the story. Let's take, I'll say the incident, and then I'll point it out in Exodus, and then I'll point it out in Star Wars. Okay?
And that's interesting because we know that George Lucas read The Hero with 1,000 Faces because he said he was influenced by that.
That's important to point out. George Lucas was the first person to make the connection and to consciously apply this formula to his movie. Absolutely did it straight out of the book, The Hero with 1,000 Faces. He took The Hero with 1,000 Faces and he took some paper over here and he made up his characters. He originally wanted to do Buck Rogers or something, but he couldn't get the rights from De Laurentiis, so he did his own. And he used Campbell over here, and he just followed it. Because that's the kind of thing he read. He was, more intellectual than he appears. And then he got Star Wars, and nothing like it. There'd never been a phenomenon on that scale as far as response, where people saw a movie 12 times.
Yeah.
There had been big hits, but it had never been like that, bragging rights on how many times you'd seen the movie. It was obsessive, and it's been repeated many times.
Yes.
Okay, But interesting though, proving Campbell's point, prior to George Lucas doing this absolutely consciously right out of a book, there were huge filmmakers doing this semi-consciously. In other words, they had sort of guessed at this, and they were sort of feeling along. They were sort of feeling the myth. They sort of were guessed, which shows that this myth seems to be something we are hardwired with.
Or could they have been influenced by other filmmakers who were in tune with Joseph Campbell, perhaps?
Well, there seems to be that if you follow this pattern, there's a resonance in the audience, and so I think it's not just that. I think there's something more to it, and because one of the things Campbell pointed out, which really rang a whole bunch of bells for him, was that a lot of these cultures had never been in contact at any time.
Right.
Or at least at the time they were creating their myths, they're creating them over here, they're creating them over here, and across thousands of years, and they don't know about these other stories, and yet they're hitting the same points. So it's mysterious, and that could be another subject. What is the source of this story? That's another subject. But this is the facts. Okay, the first point in this story is the situation. You got to understand the situation of a great hero myth. Okay, there is a collision between two worlds, a world of light and a world of darkness, somehow symbolically portrayed, usually good and evil. Okay, the sweet, shy, nice people, and the bad, mean, terrible people of the world of darkness.
Right.
And they're colliding because usually the good people have a need to move forward, and the bad people, the darkness, are stopping them.
Right.
But symbolically, by the way, Campbell was interested in Jungian archetypes and things. Mm-hmm. So he believes that these have a deeper psychological meaning than just good and bad, that it has more to do with light and dark. Okay, so, and the story occurs right on the border between two worlds. And there's a collision because there's an impasse. The good people can't go forward because of the bad people, or the light can't go forward because the darkness is pushing it.
Right.
Which has all kinds of Christian meaning and all kinds of, every religion finds meaning in this, and this is how we portray it. Okay, that collision, we say in Exodus, is the collision where the Jews have been held back for 500 years and have had enough.
Right.
And the Egyptians are big, bad, awful repressors that aren't going to give an inch.
Right.
And it's getting worse and worse for the Jews.
Right.
Okay. So something's got to happen. So into this world, on this border, comes a person, the hero.
The hero.
Who seems to be sort of like anointed from something. He doesn't intend, he has to, in fact, in the story, he has to never intend to be the hero. That's essential. He's just a person.
It's thrust upon him.
He's thrust upon him. But he is particularly the only one who can do this job because he is a half-breed. He's half of the world of darkness and half of the world of light, where nobody else is. Nobody else is a little bit of both. And and a lot of times he'll actually have a parent from either side. Okay, Moses in Exodus is a Jew, and he's also the son of the Pharaoh. And he may even ascend if his brother dies. He may even ascend to be Pharaoh. So he doesn't know this, and he gets surprised with it. But so you see how he can speak both languages. Now the Jews can't really walk into the palace and talk to the Pharaoh. That's ridiculous. They're slaves. And the Egyptians don't give a darn.
No.
So only a guy who can walk in both of these worlds is going to be able to sort of negotiate between the two and make a deal. Okay. So in Exodus, that's pretty obvious. You have Moses is a Pharaoh, is an Egyptian and a Jew. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker is really the son of Darth Vader. So he sort of like my father is the Pharaoh,
right.
And But he doesn't realize it, but he also, has this good Jedi heritage in him too.
Right.
And he's like this person that's perfectly orchestrated from his birth, that he doesn't know it because he was separated at birth from some crazy, I don't really know the story that well. I got lost somewhere along the line. But you get the idea.
Right.
He's going to negotiate for the rebels against the Empire. Okay. The next thing that happens, incidentally, just to show that it's an old myth, Jesus is also this half-breed in the myth of the story. His father is God and his mother is a human being.
Right.
So he's the only one who can negotiate for the sins of man with the Father because he is between these two worlds and he can strike a deal. You see what I'm saying?
There never seems to be a peaceful journey for any of these people.
No, it's always horrible. It's an adventure, and adventures are like Indiana Jones.
Right.
They're adventures. You lose your hat along the way.
Yeah.
So the next thing, so that's the situation. That's the character. He's the guy who doesn't realize it. The reluctant hero. Then there's a call to adventure. That always happens. He's approached. In Exodus, you could say that happens with the burning bush. God says, "I'd like you to go and free my people, from the Egyptians, free the Hebrews." And in Star Wars, you have Obi-Wan Kenobi comes to Luke and tells him a little bit about his past. I knew your father. You're really a Jedi. You're going to have to do all this stuff. Okay. The next thing that has to happen is the hero rejects it. It's refusal of the call.
There's a reluctance.
Reluctance. Absolutely. Otherwise, he's not the hero.
Right.
If he goes, "Oh, damn, really?
This is fun.
This is really fun."
Right.
That's not the hero. You got the wrong guy. It's like, self-made gurus. Those aren't the
Yeah,
heroes.
the woods are full of them.
Yeah, they're not. They initiate themselves. They
Right.
can't wait to have a bunch of disciples or free the world and save
money.
us all. Yeah. So he goes, no. They say no. I'm just a nobody. They have to have that humility.
Right.
So of course, everybody from Moses says to God, but I have a problem with my speech. And supposedly they think he might have had a speech impediment,
A stuttering
a
problem.
stuttering problem. They're not sure. And so he objects. And I don't remember, but my daughter's 10 years old, and she saw the movie more recently. But in Star Wars, Luke Skywalker initially is very hesitant and reluctant and uncomfortable with this and doubting it. Then what happens is the hero is then given a supernatural aid. Well, it can be a person, or it can be an object, or it can be both. The supernatural aid, somebody intervenes who like a wizard or a witch or somebody, a fairy godmother or something. That's fairy tales, by the way, which is different than myth. We're talking about myth is not fairy tales. But they may, in the more obvious sense, they'll give him something and they'll say, here, this has powers. Well, in Star Wars, Obi-Wan Kenobi gives him a lightsaber.
Right. And
I'm always going to be your guide, too. I'm your supernatural aid. Here's a supernatural object. This is going to help you. And we're going to, okay. In the Moses story, obviously, that's the staff.
The staff, yeah.
And God's going to guide him. I'll tell you what to do. You'll do my wonders, et cetera. It's the same thing. Story structure-wise, I don't want anybody to think that's what some people thought Joseph Campbell was anti-Semitic, didn't like Jews
now,
because he
said
said
that.
this.
How did that come about? I've heard that. Why was that?
I think it's because people think he's saying it's all just bogus and psychological fantasy, and I'm not saying that anyway. I could see an historical Moses. There's all kinds of ways to interpret this. Maybe there are other interpretations besides this is just spasming of the psyche,
So
making stuff up.
Maybe his critics are just indulging in one-dimensional thinking.
Yeah, he was very mystical, and he took these stories extremely seriously, and took great inspiration from them, and including from Exodus and the Bible. He found them even more, once he felt he understood them better, he felt even more potency from them.
Yeah.
Because it is more than just the hero myth. He goes into a lot more depth about the meaning of the stories. But this is just one dimension of even Campbell, is this hero story. The next thing that happens is now they've got their supernatural aid, they give in, they say okay, they go, they confront the bad guy, they negotiate with the darkness on behalf of the light. But they're neither quite of the light or of the darkness. And and if anything, they're more of the darkness than they are of the light. You have to sort of understand that well, we'll get to that, what happens in the story, and you'll see why they're not. It's not like they're a goody-goody two-shoes fighting the baddies.
Right.
This is a person who's a perfect mix.
So you're not talking about like a Roy Rogers Western where the guys all wear good guys wear white hats and the bad guys all
No,
wear black.
actually, no, that's really primitive Westerns. Later, when the Westerns got really mythological with John Ford, I'll show you the same patterns in a minute, because you'll see late Westerns with John Wayne,
Right.
he becomes this anti-hero, and he is definitely as rough and tough and even a little corrupt as the guys he's fighting on behalf of the nice, sweet pioneers with their okay. So the next thing is then he has to go have this battle, and of course it reaches an all-time bottom. It gets really, really bad, and in Joseph Campbell he calls this the belly of the whale. This would be the crucifixion of Jesus. With Moses, I'm not sure. I forget what he says is that point where it reaches maybe it's when he reaches the Red Sea and they don't know how they're going to cross. And then he does actually talk about Jonah and the whale having this myth in it, where where you sort of, and in ancient myths you sometimes even had, he said the hero goes down into Hades. That's literally what he has to do. Yeah. And then return and bring some kind of knowledge.
Is that when Christ went 40 days in the
desert? Yes, that's right. That would be the belly of the whale. That's what it was. It was when he goes into Hades for 3 days. That's right. That's the belly of the whale thing. And then he comes out. I'm skipping over it because there's a lot of parts here. So I'm going to make it simpler. Get to the end and then talk about it. Then, interestingly, this I always found fascinating. And now I'm sort of switching analogies around because some are more helpful than others to express this. When this hero, who's sort of caught and doesn't quite belong in either world, resolves this problem, he does not reap the benefit of his sacrifice. Okay, in Exodus that's extremely clear. Moses turns, finally after 40 years in the desert, he takes them to the Jordan River.
Right.
And they're on the west side of the Jordan River. And he says, now cross that river, and that is the land of the milk and honey I've taken you to. Now you've your promised land. And they're like, well, are you coming? He goes, all right. His wife's dead, he's just all alone. He goes, no, you guys go, it's not for me. The hero knows that he can't partake because he's really not one of them.
Yeah.
He's doing this for them, but he doesn't really belong with them. He doesn't belong anywhere.
Right.
And so he then turns around. They go forward, finish the journey over this last boundary, and he turns around and heads, in every story, it's really bizarre, west toward the setting sun. And that's what
Kinda
Moses...
like Shane.
Yes, and there was an expression for people who are old enough like us to remember real Westerns in the 60s. They used to have a joke, riding off into the sunset.
Right.
And he rides off alone into the sunset. And a lot of times he's fallen in love with the school marm, but he also likes the hooker, you know. But he says goodbye to the school marm, and he says, I love you, but, I'll never be able to settle down, ma'am. But, glad, and they, there's all that tension. And then he heads west. Well, that's exactly what Moses did. It's sort of like, I've done this for you guys, but I can't ever be comfortable in it myself. I don't belong in it. I was created for this task. I wasn't created to go into your land of milk and honey. That's not really that's never really been what I wanted anyway. It's just what I was told to do for you. And so now I don't know where to go from here. I could show that this shows up. By the way, you could just do it on your. Anybody could think it through on their own, or I could point out examples. But this has been shown to be true in the detective genre of the 1930s.
How so?
Okay, that's really, really great. The detective genre had exactly the same archetypes. However, Joseph Campbell wasn't born yet, so nobody ever thought of this. But everything's there. For instance, the world of this is what's called the hard-boiled film noir detective story.
Philip Marlowe.
Philip Marlowe is exactly what I'm talking about. So in those stories, which were not little dime novels before the movies, in those stories you have a collision of a world of light and dark. It's the world between the suburbs and the inner city. The rich, sort of nice, but sort of sleazy people.
The sordid underworld of the rich.
They're sort of the sordidly underworldly rich, but they're the world of light, unfortunately, in this sordid film noir story. And then the world of dark is the gangsters and all the
really dark,
with the machine gun, really bad dark people who liquor you up and make your car go off a cliff and Hitchcock and those really bad people.
Yeah.
So, and the people of the suburbs can't deal with these bad people, like they stole their jewels or they kidnapped their wife or whatever they did. I'm not a big fan of those stories, so I'm just guessing.
I love those stories.
Okay, well, they go and they hire a detective, the private eye.
Right.
Now, the private eye is the guy who walks, and Philip Marlowe wrote this, the man who's he doesn't belong in any world, but he's comfortable in any world, and he walks between two worlds. It's in a famous line by Philip Marlowe I should have brought. Not Philip Marlowe, Raymond Chandler, who wrote the Philip Marlowe stories, wrote this description of his hero at one point, which totally fits the man who doesn't fit anywhere and walks between the shadow and the light, basically. He's bad as hell.
They're kind of like the last of the Knights Templar, almost.
Yeah, they sort of serve as a knight. That's interesting you say that, because one of the things about the hero usually is that, unlike the people that he's serving, who are the good people, he has the martial arts of the people he's opposing.
Right.
But he's not as bad as them. So a gunfighter, for instance, comes and he might be my ma was a squaw, but my father was a blah, blah. He's a half-breed.
Right.
Or for some reason he's like, but he has the martial skills. He can pull a gun really fast, just as fast, faster than the fastest hired gunslinger.
Yeah.
But he's going to do it for the good guys because they just have old muskets. They're pioneers. What do they have? Flintlocks.
Right, the one-shot rifles.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you got to have somebody with the powers, like Moses, who has this power to create miracles, like the Egyptians can make cobras.
Right.
He can create a better cobra out of his staff, that kind of thing, martial arts. So the hard-boiled detective's got the skills of the underworld. And so he gets paid, and then he goes in, and then he does his job, and then he sort of makes it possible for it's a very strange story because I don't remember ever liking any of the people that he's serving. They're usually
they're
pretty
never
corrupt.
very likable people.
No, but it's still the same myth. I mean, do you really like the people that Jesus saved in the story? They're all they wanted him crucified at the time. Do you like the people that Moses was delivering from Israel? Are they all good people? No, they created a big calf. So that's not what the story is. Not black and white like that. It just has to do with sort of like it's sort of shades of gray.
And you kind of realize if it wasn't for the hero, they'd be happy. They'd be happy as punch, just sitting around still being enslaved.
Yeah. In a way, it's hard to sympathize when you in these stories for the people that are being saved. They're not. Now in Star Wars, they make it pretty darn black and white. You got really nice people and bad people that kill kids and do really nasty things. But that's almost a perversion of the sort of the deeper mysteries of it, because Lucas is doing it almost too deliberately, like out of the book,
right? Rather
than feeling the energy of what this stuff is saying to us.
It's almost as though the hero wouldn't be actually totally accepted by the people he's helping either. He's not someone they'd really want to hang out with.
No. As a matter of fact, that's really important, and I've always wanted to do a show about this and have a clip from a movie, because when I went to film school in the 80s, there were certain films that they used to express this idea. Like, there's nothing original, I'm saying.
Right.
Okay. And one of them is Shane, that you mentioned, and another one is The Searchers.
The great John Ford Western.
Yeah, John Ford Western. I don't know who did Shane, but most people today may not have seen them unless they're real movie buffs, because they're classics.
They show up on Turner Classic Movies.
Okay, well, they're classics because they perfectly embody the hero, the myth, the full-blown myth, unembarrassedly told. Right. You know, exactly hitting every mark in it. Now, in film school, they stop the shot and they say, "Look at this shot. I want to tell you what it means. Freeze. Now, we're going to tell you what this means." In both movies, they have the same shot, which expresses just what you said: the discomfort between the hero and the people he's serving. In Shane, he's helping a little farmer family.
Right.
Because there's these cattlemen that don't want them to have sheep or something like that.
Right, yep.
But Shane has a crush on the guy's wife.
Yeah, very much so.
But they don't say it because it's 1950s.
Right.
But he really likes her. And he would love to have...
She really likes him, too.
Yeah, it's mutual. And the kid likes him.
Yeah.
That's strange. So into our world today, you're going to divorce.
Yeah.
But this is the 1800s, supposedly, in the story. And there's a scene where he stands outside her kitchen window. He's outside in the yard. And she's standing in the kitchen, inside the house. Inside, and it's deliberately lit, so it's all warm. It's a colored film. It's all warm inside. Then they do the reverse shot of him looking at her through the window, and it's all cold behind him.
Right.
And that's supposed to be, we're in love, but we can never join because I can't live in your world.
Right.
And he never enters the house in the film. Then they go to the movie The Searchers. And remember what I said about Moses doesn't cross over the Jordan River. The hero stays. It's weird that it's there, always there. It's fantastic. The Searchers is so classic. I mean, it's as a matter of fact, Star Wars, I'll show, is based on The Searchers and about a dozen other films, actually straight from The Searchers. Like, everybody did their Searchers version for about 10 years in the 60s. But John Wayne, is that his sister-in-law or something? I think it's something very similar. I don't remember. Have you seen the film?
Years ago.
Okay, well, they have the identical shot. John Wayne, you have to watch the show carefully, but he never enters the people's house. It's really bizarre. And there may be one scene where he's inside, but it's very strange, and he looks very misfitting, and with all his guns and everything, it's not right. And he's, he's like a bull in a china cabinet. Yeah. But the scene is him in the porch, the woman again in the inside in the hearth, and then doing the two shots, showing him framed. They have him framed by the porch, and then behind him what Joseph Campbell calls the what did they used to call the desert, like the wilderness.
Right.
That's what the classic word for it. It's just very biblical, actually. And then she's in the hearth, and he can't come in. And it's a little like if you believe the Catholic version and not the Gnostic version of the Bible, well, it's like that with Jesus, too. He can't marry Mary Magdalene and have a nice life. That's what the movie The Last Temptation of Christ is about.
Right.
He can't have this.
Because it negates everything if he does
It negates what he, it's like I came to serve you people. If I just, take what I can from what, I'm creating, it just perverts the whole story.
Now, it seems to me as though films, in a large sense, have gotten away from this epic sort of filmmaking and the mythic sort of filmmaking in the last few decades.
Recently, they're less entertaining too.
Yeah, they are. They're formulaic.
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of films that are these kind of. We're talking about hero stories.
Yes.
We're not talking about Brokeback Mountain, which is not a hero myth story.
No.
we're talking about.
We're talking
an
about
adventure
the so-called
movie.
adventure movies.
They try, in Matrix, they did a very self-conscious attempt to do a lot of these things. Neo
Right.
is supposed to be this person, very, very, very obvious. See, it almost becomes too obvious. But he's playing the Christ.
Right.
They literally have him like this, standing
Yeah.
in front of an electronic god.
Yeah.
They really go over the top to do it. But
For the most part, it's like
sacrifices
Yeah,
himself.
for the most part, I think when it seems that when they get away from the Campbell, the myth-making stories, it seems to me they're more formulaic. It's like they're written on a computer. Remember the old books years ago? They choose your own adventure. You know, you'd go to a certain page, and the heroes would have to do something. Then you go to another page, and that would happen. It seems to me that that's how a lot of the movies today are being made, and they're less interesting.
Well, I haven't seen many of these that are good. I agree. Even the newer Star Wars movies, I didn't think even had the quality anymore. I don't know.
I think George Lucas had the money. I just don't think he had the interest
Yeah,
when he made the last 3 movies.
yeah. Another really great subject could be a whole show. One day. I don't know if I could even do it, but is the whole subject of what is this story? Where is it? How does it exist? What are its origins? Because it seems like it pops out of people. It doesn't get handed down on a tablet. But actually, I'm not qualified to talk about it. It would be you bring a Jungian and they would
do you
talk
think
about it.
maybe there is a basic human need for these kind of stories?
I think that they reflect some kind of actual truth. Like not you know what I mean? Like there is a battle in us between a light and a dark. And we are all on a journey. And we do have to sort of like we resist it, we don't want to do it. If we're very well adjusted, let's say. Let's take like John F. Kennedy. He gets called to adventure because his brother Joe was killed in a airplane incident in World War II, but he was the one who was supposed to be president.
Right.
And John F. Kennedy was very weak and meek and just wanted to please his dad.
Yeah.
So now he's called to adventure. So he takes it. Who knows to what extent he resisted it or he took it and tried to do it. The myth plays out. It's really interesting because you can see this story even playing in life. You know, to say, oh well, Chris is saying that Jesus couldn't have been sacrificed on a cross for speaking about love. Why am I saying that?
I didn't hear you say that.
No, exactly. My point is, geez, you see this myth played out all the time in people who sort of, or in Gandhi, people who rise to their full potential.
I think when you say the word myth,
I don't mean it how it sounds.
I think some people at home are going, Maud, turn off the TV.
Yeah.
You know, he's calling us all liars. He's calling us fools.
Right. No,
you know?
no. It's that there's a sacred story. I mean, it's sacred to the human being, and I think that it's completely I think it's compatible with a very spiritual point of view.
There's something that should be celebrated then.
Yeah, that's what Joseph Campbell was trying to say. He was saying, just in exploring it was so exciting and invigorating for him. There's much more, like I say, than this. The more he delved into these ancient stories, he didn't study the films like I'm talking about. He studied the ancient, the Vedas and the Kabbalic writings and Gnostics and Christian Catholic. He was Catholic himself, and very impressed with Catholic ceremonies and saw tremendous meaning in everything that they did. More meaning than the people taking the Mass. For him, the whole Mass meant, I can't do it, but he would say, the wine is da-da-da-da, and I can relate that to this here, and to him it starts coming even more to life.
Well, maybe if people start checking this out and actually reading Joseph Campbell's book, it might bring new meaning to the movies they watch.
I think so. I found it. I went to film school in the 80s in USC in California. And it's a school that George Lucas went to. But he went in the 60s, and I came in the 80s, and the first thing they showed us was his student film. They said, sit down, you're going to watch our best student film, we want you to go make us proud like this. Make a lot of money.
What student film was that?
THX 1138, the short. There's
later he made the
yeah.
big
There's a
movie out of it,
later
right.
there's a
Yeah.
full-length movie, but this is the 10-minute film that he made while he was there that launched him because
How was it?
it's fantastic.
Really?
It's very strange and fantastic, but completely incomprehensible.
I loved the full length version. I'd love to see
The original, the 10 minutes better.
Really?
It's
Is it?
better, yeah. And for a moment, Jesus appears in it. It's really, it's sort of a religious sci-fi. It's very, very cool. But then, what was I going to say about that? What was I talking about? I said, I heard that George Lucas read a book. That's all I had heard. I think I heard it like sitting around in the commissary, at the university, on the film school part.
Yeah.
And I went to one of the guys that was working toward his PhD in film studies rather than production. And he said, oh, let me write that down for you. And so he gave me Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell. So I went right to the library while I was there, got out that book, and it just, I don't know why, I guess it awakened my mind from a very shallow, small world of sort of isolated stories all over the world and these remote cultures all in conflict. And suddenly I went, oh my God, there's some kind of unity behind all this diversity.
That's pretty amazing too, isn't it? When you realize that all these disparate cultures have so many stories that are so similar.
That's what I felt. It was like, it's like I've been living in a shallow dream, or whatever. It was. It inspired me for a long time. How much time do we have left?
We can end it any time.
Okay.
So, but I want to thank you for coming on today.
Good.
And I hope that people realize, just watching a movie, that there's a lot more complexity behind the film than they really thought, unless it's something starring Pee Wee Herman.
Which I love.
Or Scary Movie 4. But anyway, thanks very much for coming on the show tonight.
Thank you, Richard.
Thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next week. So good night, Fayetteville, wherever or whatever you are.
Hi, I'm Art Hobson. I'm the author of Tales of the Quantum, and you're watching Fayetteville Public Television.
When you have a hole in your neck, don't face the shower head. Be very careful shaving. Clean out your speech valve twice a day.
You can quit. Call 1-800-QUIT now for help getting free medication.
Our precious children. We live for them, work for them, and struggle to keep them safe. Guarding them from the unseen dangers of our world. And yet so many overlook the one simple step that can save their lives. Protect your children. Keep them buckled up.
L'Infanta March.
Mr. Blue. Yeah, that's all right.
I've seen those music videos with just static cameras.
We can take you almost anywhere, and what we sing to you is loud and clear. We can tell you what you want to hear, but what you want to hear may not be true. Singing na 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 na. Singing na 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 na. We can take you almost anywhere, and what we say to you is loud and clear. We can tell you what you want to hear, but what you want to hear may not be true. Singing na 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 na. Singing na 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 na. We can show you what you want to hear, but what you want to see may not be rest. We can take it almost anywhere, and what we seem to you is loud and clear. Singing na 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 na. Singing na 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 singing na 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 na. Take me home, na na na. Lay me down and give me rest. Singing sweet, sweet music, take me home. Voices ringing harmony. Singing sweet, sweet music, won't you take me home? Lay me down and give me rest. Singing sweet, sweet music, won't you take me home? And let our voices ring in harmony.
This is not a time to falter. This is not a time to fall. This is not a time to give up what you have struggled to create. There is still a power in the earth no man can break. Take courage, be not afraid. This is not a time to falter. This is not a time to fall. This is not a time to give up what you have struggled to create. There is still a power in you no man can break. Take courage, be not afraid. Yes, it is true. There really are people in power who are nothing but schoolyard bullies, stupid and mean. And they're pushing on you, not even for their own gain. No logic can explain, and nobody wins. But they can't hold a candle to you when you stand with your feet firm on the path you love and true power in your hand. True power, true power, true power. This is not a time to falter. This is not a time to fall. This is not a time to give up what you have struggled to create. There is still a power in the earth no man can break. Take courage, be not afraid. All around you, people can look you in the eye, tell you powers will rise, leave you confused. So what can you do? The power is not its own, and aim higher, my friend, and it'll come true. 'Cause they can't hold a candle to you when you stand with your feet firm on the path you love and true power in your hand. True power, true power, true power. This is not a time to falter. This is not a time to fall. This is not a time to give up what you have struggled to create. There is still a power in the earth no man can break. Take courage, be not afraid. This is not a time to falter. This is not a time to fall. This is not a time to give up what you have struggled to create. There is still a power in the earth no man can break. Take courage, be not afraid. Take courage, be not afraid.
Woodland Park Waltz.
In your inner bliss.
Woodland Park Waltz.
Politics in general and jobs that don't pay enough, 40-hour work weeks, books full of boring stuff, schools that should teach but kids don't learn a thing. These are a few of my least favorite things. Healthcare that won't heal and how people treat the earth, paying tolls and taxes, disbelief in self-worth, bitter cold winters that cut into spring. These are a few of my least favorite things. Religions that claim they're true, don't get me started. Standards that double and people cold-hearted. Judgment and bias when freedom don't ring. These are a few of my least favorite things. All the lying, all the killing. When I'm depressed and sad, I add that to all of my least favorite things, and then I feel really bad. Feel like Julie Andrews or something.